Hello and welcome to pmblounge.com. This is Lounge Fever, wherein we tackle your burning questions. And here's the thing, if you have any question related to project management, related to the PMP certification, anything in general, just comment on this video or any of our Lounge Fever videos for that matter. We'll definitely respond to your questions. And if they are questions that can help others as well, we'll make a video on it. So as of late we have been discussing scope management, and I'll link to the scope management playlist in the description below so you can kind of go over and learn a thing about or two about scope management. So we recently did a video on how documentation, right, writing project documents, writing the project management plan, the project schedule, and other documents like these, how these are also part of the project scope. These might not be the artifacts, these might not be the items that you actually hand over to the customer when you're done with the project, but these are still a part of the project. So then comes a very important question. What is the value of documentation? If this is not something that will be handed over to the customer, if this is not something that is of, that adds any value to the product of the project as such for the customer, it does add value for the project team though. But if it doesn't add any value for the product of the project and it is of no use for the customer, shouldn't the project team be involved more in making the product rather than doing documentation, right? So, what is it that we should stop our coding or find time after our coding to be able to write documents as well? What is the value that it provides? Very important question. May not be as important from your PMP exam perspective, but from your real life project management perspective, this question is extremely important. So, have you ever heard of these? Documentation is a waste of time. Documentation is redundant work. Documentation is done for the sake of documentation, right? Just for the sake of documenting stuff, we are doing documentation. If you've ever heard of statements like these, especially from your project team, you need to be able to challenge the situation and you need to be able to have answers to these kind of statements. So, do you have the answer? The question, of course, from the three statements that we discussed earlier is, what is the value of documentation? Why the hell are we documenting stuff when we should be concentrating on working on the project and making the product of the project? So, as a project manager, you need to ensure that the team has the answer to this question. You need to make sure that, all right, as a project manager, as someone who's PMP certified, as someone who has delivered multi-million dollar projects, and as someone who has tons of experience in project management, you might know the importance and the value that documentation carries. But it is also your duty as a project manager to make sure that the project team also understands the value of documentation. Now, if you are a project manager and if you are, let's say, a novice and you don't really know what the value of documentation really is, we are here to help. Let's try to look into what is the exact value of documentation. Why is it so important and why we want our project teams to be able to find time and create documents, do the documentation work, which is as important as creating the product of the project. So this is the absolute best way to keep track of the work done, the strategies used, any changes that might have occurred, and every other minute detail during the course of the project. So while you're working on the project, right, there are so many moving parts, so many things change, uh, so many, the requirements may change for the product, so many changes happen, the resources might change, right? So are you capable enough to have all this information stored safely in your mind, and is that information always available on top of your mind so that if somebody asks for it, you can quickly share it with them? Not really, right? How much can a human mind possibly hold? So the to keep track of the work done, to be able to you know look at certain documentations and be able to give the status of the project, where we exactly are right now, documentation is the absolute best way of doing it. Documentation is absolutely the best way to avoid the blame game. Now, what do I mean by blame game? Right? Something goes wrong. There's an error that has occurred, and there's an error in the code, right? Um, who did it? Who is responsible for fixing the error? Yeah. If there was certain module which was used and which is causing the error, how would you know which team is has added that module in the code? Well, you cannot know it unless it is documented somewhere, right? So, if it is out in the open, if it's just an error that has occurred in the project, there this could actually lead to a blame game. This could actually lead to a situation where the teams actually just blame each other on whose module has caused this error or what is the reason for that error. If you have documentation of who has done what in the project, this entire blame game can be avoided. And which is extremely important, right? All projects are typically short of budget and time. And avoiding this blame game is definitely going to help you keep track of your time and avoid any wastage of it. Documentation is absolutely the best way to keep everyone on the same page and make sure there are no unpleasant surprises and unknown risks. Now, as a project manager, right? As a project manager handling a team of 20 coders, 10 testers, and some designers and other folks on the project, right? Let's say a tester comes to you and tells you that he or she basically sees a risk that might impact the project. What do you do? If it's a big risk, you will definitely go ahead and search in your risk management plan if it was documented there. If you don't have a risk management plan altogether, that's a risk that you simply have, and all these stakeholders of the project might not even be aware of such risk. So uh, if that risk actually materializes, half of your stakeholders who were not aware of that risk might get an unpleasant surprise, right? So avoid surprises, avoid these risks, avoid and you know any other event which is not documented and which may happen to the project. If you have to avoid it, you have to document it, right? So that is why, to make sure that the entire project team and all relevant stakeholders are on the same page, a lot of the of stuff needs to be documented. There is just no getting around it, right? So if you had a risk management plan, and if a tester came to you and cited a risk that might occur in the project that he or she oversees, you can simply update the risk management plan, and the all the project team, the entire project team, and all the stakeholders involved could actually be able to see that risk in your documentation, right? In your whatever document that you're using to manage your risks, right? So whoever has the access to it can see it, can see that certain document, right? Maybe it's your risk register. It could be anything depending on how you manage your project, right? By the way, we have covered risk management in in quite a bit of detail. I'll link to a certain video on risk management in the description, so you can go over that if you don't know what we are talking about in this point. And the last point is that documentation is absolutely the best way to transfer knowledge. Now, let's say you as a project manager needs to take over some other project. All right, you need to leave a project in between halfway and you have to take up some other project. How do you transfer all the project knowledge to a colleague project manager? It's actually impossible to do so if you have no documentation, right? So you need documentation for knowledge transfer, and this was just one of the ways, right? One of the examples why documentation is important in terms of knowledge transfer. Let's say you have a very key resource in the project, and that resource is going to be away for 2 weeks because he or she is has just fallen ill or something, right? How can someone who is going to replace that resource be able to catch up on what's going on the project? Of course, only through documentation. That is the only way other resource will be able to catch up with what's going on and fill in the shoes of someone of the key resource who is out. So documentation is absolutely the best way to transfer knowledge. So these are some of the reasons that we could think of on why documentation is important. And these are the reasons that as an experienced project manager, you must have seen on your projects as well come to life, right? So reasons like these are 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 talking points that you should be discussing with the project team and letting them know why documentation is important, why it is equally important to write documents as it is important to complete your coding or complete your testing or whatever your responsibility in the project team is. So that's all that we had in this video. Hope you learned a thing or two about documentation from this. Like this YouTube video if you liked it, and subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. And check us out on our social media, facebook.com/pmplounge and twitter.com/pmplounge. And as always, do check out the website pmplounge.com, your number one free resource for PMP certification and project management industry information. Thank you.